going! Don't stop!
I can't!
Yes, you can! We have to make it!
They're watching us!
He thought it would be just another quiet day on the farm, until he heard a desperate scream coming from the river. Without thinking, the farmer ran toward the sound, and what he saw made his heart stop. A woman, barely conscious, being pulled under by the current. He jumped in, fighting the rushing water, risking everything to save her. But just as he pulled her to safety, she grabbed his shirt, looked straight into his eyes, and whispered a name. A name he never expected to hear. A name that connected her to a past he tried to forget. Then, she lost consciousness. Who was she? And how did she know that name? This is the moment that changed the farmer's life forever. The morning began like any other on the farm. A pale light spread across the fields as the sun rose behind the distant hills. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of damp soil and wild grass. The farmer stepped out of his small wooden house, closing the door quietly behind him. He paused for a moment, looking out over the land he had worked for years. Rows of crops stretched out in neat lines, and the old barn stood firm against the edge of the property. He moved through his routine without thinking. He fed the animals, checked the fences, and walked the edges of his fields. The work was steady and familiar. It gave him something to focus on, something that kept his mind from wandering too far. There had been a time when this place felt different. Warmer, perhaps. Livelier. But that time had passed, and he had learned not to dwell on it. By mid-morning, the sun had begun to climb higher, and the stillness of the land settled around him again. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds. He carried a bucket toward the well when something faint reached his ears. At first, he thought it was nothing more than the wind moving through the trees. But then he heard it again. A voice. It was weak and broken, carried unevenly across the air. He stopped where he stood, listening. The sound came from beyond the far edge of his land, near the river that cut through the fields. He set the bucket down slowly, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of it. No one came out this way. Not without a reason. The voice came again, louder this time, filled with panic. He did not think after that. He started running. The ground was uneven beneath his feet as he moved past the last row of crops and into the tall grass. The sound of the river grew stronger with each step, along with the frantic cries that now left no room for doubt. When he reached the bank, he saw her. A woman struggled against the current, her movements slow and desperate. The water dragged at her, pulling her under again and again. Her hand broke the surface for a moment before slipping beneath it once more. He kicked off his boots and stepped into the river without hesitation. The cold hit him at once, sharp and biting, but he pushed forward. The current pressed against him, stronger than it looked from the shore. He forced his way through it, his eyes fixed on the spot where she had last disappeared. For a second, there was nothing. Then he saw her. He lunged forward and caught hold of her arm just as she began to sink again. Her skin was cold, her grip weak. He pulled her toward him, turning his body against the force of the water. Each step back to the shore felt heavier than the last, but he did not stop. When they reached the bank, he dragged her onto the grass and dropped to his knees beside her. She lay still for a moment, her chest barely moving. He leaned closer, calling out to her, his voice low but urgent. Her eyes opened slightly. She looked at him, her gaze unfocused, as if she were seeing something far away. Her lips moved, though no sound came at first. He leaned in closer, trying to catch her words. Then, with what little strength she had left, she whispered a name. His breath caught in his throat. It was a name he had not heard in years. Before he could speak, before he could even ask how she knew it, her body went limp. He carried her inside with care, as if any sudden movement might break whatever fragile hold she still had on life. Her clothes were soaked and heavy, leaving a trail of water across the wooden floor. He laid her on the narrow bed near the window and stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The room felt smaller with her in it. He moved quickly after that. He brought dry blankets, lit the stove, and set water to warm. His hands worked with quiet urgency, though his mind was far from calm. The name she had spoken echoed in his thoughts, steady and unyielding. He tried to push it aside, to focus on what was in front of him, but it would not leave. When he returned to her side, he noticed how pale she looked. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. He placed a folded cloth beneath her head and covered her with the blankets, tucking them in close to keep the warmth from escaping. For a long while, he sat beside her, watching for any sign that she might wake. Hours passed. The light outside shifted, turning softer as the day moved on. At some point, she stirred. It was a small movement at first, a faint shift of her hand against the blanket. Then a quiet sound, barely more than a breath. He leaned forward, his attention fixed on her face. Her eyes opened slowly. For a moment, she seemed confused, as if she did not know where she was. Her gaze moved around the room, taking in the walls, the window, the faint glow of the fire. When her eyes settled on him, something in her expression changed. Not fear exactly, but recognition. "You're safe," he said, keeping his voice steady. She did not answer right away. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Instead, she studied him in silence, as though trying to match his face with a memory she could not fully grasp. After a while, she tried to sit up. He reached out at once. "No. You need to rest." She hesitated, then allowed herself to sink back against the bed. Her strength was clearly not enough to argue. He poured a small cup of water and held it out to her. She drank slowly, her hands trembling as she held the cup. When she finished, she kept her eyes on him. "You were in the river," he said. "Do you remember how you got there?" A pause followed. "I slipped," she said at last. Her voice was weak, but steady enough. "The ground gave way." It sounded simple. Too simple. He nodded, though he did not press her. "There's no path along that stretch. Not one people use." She looked away then, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the blanket. "I must have lost my way." He watched her for a moment longer. There was something in the way she spoke, something careful about it. Like each word had been chosen before it was said. Silence settled between them. Finally, he asked the question that had been waiting since the river. "When I pulled you out, you said something." Her gaze flickered back to him. "A name," he continued. "Do you remember?" For a brief moment, her expression shifted. It was subtle, but he saw it. A trace of something deeper than confusion. Then it was gone. "I don't remember," she said quietly. The answer came too quickly. He leaned back in his chair, studying her without hiding it now. "You said it clearly." "I was not awake," she replied. "People say things when they are not aware." "That was not just anything." She did not respond. Instead, she turned her face slightly toward the window, as if the fading light outside held more interest than the conversation. The room grew quiet again. He stood after a while and moved toward the door. "You should rest," he said. "We can talk later." She gave a small nod, though she still did not look at him. When he stepped outside, the evening air felt cooler than before. The sky had begun to darken, and the land stretched out in silence around him. 4 years, nothing unexpected had touched this place. Now, everything felt different. Inside the house, the woman lay still beneath the blankets. Her eyes remained open long after he left the room, and though she had claimed not to remember, the name she had whispered stayed clear in her mind. The next morning came with a quiet stillness that felt heavier than usual. A thin layer of mist lay across the fields, softening the edges of the land. The farmer had been awake long before the sun rose. Sleep had not come easily. Each time he closed his eyes, he heard that name again, clear as it had been by the river. Inside the house, the woman was still resting. He had checked on her more than once through the night. Each time, he found her in the same position, her breathing steady, her face calm but distant. It was not the look of someone at peace. It was the look of someone holding something back. He stepped outside for a while, letting the cold air clear his head. The routine of the farm waited for him as it always did, but his hands moved without their usual certainty. His thoughts remained inside that small room. When he returned, he found her sitting up. She looked stronger than before, though the color had not fully returned to her face. The blanket was wrapped around her shoulders, and her gaze was fixed on the window. She turned when she heard him enter. "You should not be up yet," he said. "I feel better," she replied. Her voice held more strength now, though it still carried a trace of strain. He set a cup of warm broth on the small table beside her. "You need time." She nodded, but did not reach for the cup right away. Instead, she watched him as he moved across the room. There was a quiet tension in the air, one that neither of them had addressed. After a moment, she spoke. "You live here alone." It was not a question. "Yes." "For how long?" He paused before answering. "A long time." She lowered her eyes slightly, as if measuring his words against something she already knew. "It must get quiet. I am used to it." She gave a faint nod, though it did not seem like agreement. More like recognition. He leaned against the table, folding his arms. "You said you lost your way. Where were you headed?" Her fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. "I was looking for someone." The answer came slowly this time. "Who?" She hesitated. For a moment, it seemed like she might not answer at all. Then she looked up at him. "I do not know his name," she said. He frowned slightly. "You came all this way for someone whose name you do not know?" "I know enough," she replied. The words settled between them. He studied her more closely now. "Then tell me what you do know." Her gaze held his for a long moment. There was no confusion in it now. No uncertainty. Only a quiet resolve. "I know he lives near a river," she said. "Far from the town. I know he keeps to himself. And I know," she paused, her voice softening, "that he once left something behind." A chill moved through him that had nothing to do with the morning air. "You speak as if you know me," he said. "I did not say that." "You did not have to." Silence followed. It stretched longer this time, filled with everything neither of them had yet said. He pushed himself away from the table and took a step closer. "That name you spoke," he said, his voice lower now, "it is not a common one. Not here. Not anywhere nearby." Her expression shifted again, but she did not look away. "Where did you hear it?" She drew a slow breath. For a moment, it seemed as though she might turn from the question again. But something in his voice held her there. "I heard it from someone who could not forget it," she said at last. The words were careful, but they carried weight. His jaw tightened. "Who?" She hesitated only briefly this time. "A woman," she said. "She spoke of it often, even when she tried not to." A memory stirred at the edge of his mind, one he had spent years trying to bury. He turned slightly, his gaze drifting toward the far wall, though he did not seem to see it. "That is not possible," he said quietly. "She believed it was," the woman replied. He shook his head once, as if to push the thought away. No one who knew that name would send a stranger here. "I am not a stranger," she said. The words came without hesitation. He looked back at her sharply. "Then what are you?" For the first time since he had found her, there was no trace of uncertainty in her face. "I am someone who has been searching for answers," she said. "For a long time." A sudden sound broke the moment. It came from outside, faint but unmistakable. The distant rumble of an engine, growing slowly louder. Both of them turned toward the door. The woman's expression changed at once. Whatever strength she had shown a moment before gave way to something else. Fear. "They found me," she whispered. The farmer did not ask who she meant. He was already moving toward the window, his eyes narrowing as he looked out across the fields. The sound of the engine grew louder, cutting through the quiet of the fields. The farmer stood at the window, his eyes fixed on the narrow dirt path that led toward the house. A dark vehicle came into view, moving slowly but with purpose. He turned back to her. "Who are they?" She had already pushed the blanket aside, though her movements were unsteady. "They cannot find me here," she said, her voice low but urgent. "If they do, it will not end well." "That depends on why they are here," he replied. "They are not here to talk." There was no time for more questions. The vehicle drew closer, its tires pressing deep into the soft ground. He could see two men inside, their faces unclear but their intent obvious. He made his choice without another word. "Stay out of sight," he said, guiding her toward the back room. "Do not make a sound." She caught his arm before he could step away. "You do not understand what you are risking." He looked at her, steady and certain. "I understand enough." A heavy knock struck the front door. The sound echoed through the house. He pulled his arm free and walked toward it, his steps calm but firm. Outside, the engine went silent. Another knock followed, harder this time. The farmer reached for the handle and paused for a brief moment. Then he opened the door. The door swung open slowly. Two men stood outside, their clothes dusted from the road, their eyes scanning everything behind him. One of them spoke first. "We are looking for a woman," he said. The farmer did not move aside. "There is no one here." The second man stepped forward slightly. "We know she came this way." A quiet tension filled the space between them. The farmer kept his voice steady. "Then you are mistaken." For a moment, neither side spoke. The wind moved through the yard, bending the tall grass. From inside the house, there was no sound at all. Then the first man tried to step past him. The farmer blocked the way. "She is not part of your business," he said. The man's expression hardened. "You do not understand what she carries." "I understand enough," the farmer replied. A long pause followed. The men exchanged a look, measuring the situation. The silence stretched until finally, the first man stepped back. "This is not finished," he said before turning away. The vehicle started again and slowly disappeared down the road. Only when the sound faded did the farmer close the door. Inside, the woman was waiting in the shadows of the back room. She looked at him as he entered, her fear still present but now mixed with something else. Relief. "You stood your ground," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Now tell me everything." She took a slow breath. And this time, she did not hold anything back. The woman lowered her gaze for a moment, as if gathering all the weight she had carried to this place. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but filled with emotion. "I did not come here by chance," she said. "I came because I had nowhere else left to go." The farmer stood quietly, waiting. She continued. "That name I whispered in the river, it was not just a memory. It was the last connection I had to someone who saved my life once. Someone I lost because I ran too late." Silence filled the room again, but it was no longer empty. It was full of truth. The farmer looked at her for a long time. Something in her words reached places he had kept closed for years. Questions he never allowed himself to ask began to return, but this time he did not push them away. Outside, the wind moved gently across the fields, as if nothing had changed. But inside that small house, everything had shifted. "You are safe here," he said at last. It was not a promise to fix the past. It was something simpler, something real. The woman nodded slowly, as if she had been waiting a long time to hear those words. Days would pass, and more truths would surface. Some painful, some healing. But for the first time in years, neither of them would have to face it alone. If this story moved you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. There are many more stories like this waiting to be told, stories of strangers, choices, and the moments that change everything.